So, friends, on behalf of Higher Education Forum and also on behalf of the SI School of Learning and Leadership Development, we extend a hearty welcome to all of you for this evening session. This is going to be an interesting session because the topic itself is very interesting, and that is the quality of education, role of educators. All many of us are teachers, and we must appreciate that in the changing context of education, the quality is the sole parameter that's going to differentiate between one institution from the other institution. And to talk on this particular topic, we have got a very distinguished face, one of our own actually. She is a member of Higher Education Forum itself. She is also on the governing body of the SIS LLD, Professor Shanthi Menon. She is a very distinguished academician, and currently she is the Director of Institutional Development of the prestigious University of Stirling, RAC campus. RAC is in UAE. So she will be speaking on this important topic all the way from UAE. Professor Shanti, the floor is open to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. A very warm welcome and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Sen, for the warm welcome and warm introduction. Allow me a minute to share my screen. Right. I'm presuming everybody can see my screen. If you can just tell me.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Wonderful. All right. So I know we have just about an hour for today's session. It's like an ocean if you were to talk about this particular topic. I'm not sure how much of justice I can give in an hour, but I was kind of pondering, Dr. Sen, in terms of, when you approached me about this particular topic, how I should be talking, what I should be talking, the content for this. It's huge. It's really, really vast. So given the paucity of time and given that it's 1 hour, I'll try as much as I can talk about the local context, and it'll be useful if colleagues can actually talk a little bit about from the Indian perspective, so that we can see whether there is some sort of a synergy in terms of how whether the quality of education in today's context has actually changed in terms of the role of educators. So without much ado, we'll touch base a little bit. It's not going to be theoretical like how it used to be in the past. It's going to be a very, very clear discussion in terms of what has actually changed and why it has changed, and how can you bring the role of an educator more of a facilitator than being a teacher. Those concepts have gone. It's history now. So how do we as an educator be a facilitator, and how do we facilitate our students in terms of preparing students for the real world challenges? And what I felt, rather than giving too much of theoretical academic stuff, which everybody, you and I know because we do it day in and day out, I was thinking of bringing in an applicability part of it by showing a real example of how we here at University of Stirling actually prepare students to face the real world challenges. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So when we talk about higher education, obviously you and I know that in recent years, it has gone through a lot of external demands and pressures. And particularly when we talk about the Indian higher education context and with the NPE in board, you're ideally talking about the quality of teaching, because that's what they're going to be drawing a lot of reference to in terms of quality assurance. And we are kind of looking in today's higher education context, how the quality of teaching through particularly quality assurance requirement is changing, and it has to change, and rightly so. And therefore, how do we as educators, and more so from an academic institution perspective, how do we bring about that change in order to raise that awareness to begin with, and obviously raise the quality of teaching? So before I get started, and before we get into what is that we do from our university perspective, can I open the floor for perhaps a 5 to 7 minutes of discussion? If somebody can set the tone in terms of saying what are some of the challenges that you as an educator face when you talk about the role of an educator, or you can talk about it particularly in terms of teaching challenges or student related challenges, or perhaps even going further as an educator, how do you think you could possibly be the change maker? So can I have few thoughts on that before we move forward? Anybody?
We request somebody to please speak. It's going to be an interactive session.
It's
Anybody?
a very
Dr. Nitin,
simple, straightforward thing. So, yeah, if anybody can just set the tone.
Emma,
Anyone?
Professor Emma, Kavita Krishnamurti, anybody?
As an educator, what do you think are some of the challenges that you face? Because if you don't face any challenges, then there cannot be a room for change, isn't it? So, I mean, I'll talk about a lot of challenges that we have actually faced, and perhaps that could be some of the reason. Unless and until there are challenges, there cannot be an action plan. And if there is an action plan, then, we have to implement something new so that we change the whole context of, teaching and learning, or even the role of an educator. Anybody? One or two responses would be good.
Ma'am, there is a message in chat. Dr. Vidya Satish, our Director of Comprehensive Education, has put a message. You want me to read that?
If you could, because I don't think I'll be able to see the chat and the slide together. So if you don't
Lesser
mind,
attention span. Yeah. Ma'am's point of view is lesser attention span across the teaching levels. Vidya ma'am, if you could elaborate, what does that mean? You mean to say the attention span of students are less across the courses or the level they are in, first year, second
Yes.
year?
Yeah, this is no, even at school level, whenever there is a discussion amongst teachers, this is one thing that everybody is saying, that there is, they want it all fast. Engagement is a huge issue now. They don't want to sit for long, and it is, even if you use technology, they want to fast forward the video rather than sit and watch it. So, these kind of problems, I guess it's a generation, so we should learn how to handle them.
absolutely spot on there, Dr. Vidya. And this is, I think, I'm not sure. I think I had done a session on student engagement and motivation for the same group for SIES a few months ago. So I'm not going to really touch base on student engagement and what is that academicians need to do and so on and so forth, because then we'll kind of lose focus on today's topic. But absolutely spot on there. So today, when you talk about student engagement is indeed a pertinent issue. But I want to think a little differently for today's topic. At that, student engagement is it's like an ocean. It's a huge topic, and there are so many things as educators that we can do. And to begin with, I've been an advocate where we say, uh, it should not be a teacher-centric approach today. In today's world of, academics, we need to move away from this concept of being teacher-centric. It has to be, if you want to preempt issues of student engagement, bring all the the behavioral, the emotional, the cognitive engagement in place. If you want to bring about, if you want to create critical thinkers, if you want to create the high level of academic performance among students, if you want to bring some sort of cohesion and synergy in a classroom where everybody thinks together, then this whole concept of a teacher-centric approach definitely need to vanish. It has to be a student-centric approach. It has to be where a teacher, you and I, we play a role of a facilitator. And to that, I'll use that as a context today, and go a little beyond in terms of saying how we as an educator, how our role as an educator should actually change. So today, when you absolutely said spot on, when you talk about maybe it's a generation today, maybe they have a completely different mindset in terms of what their expectations are. So when you talk about the modern global student, today the education scenario in a global context is, we talk about the advent of globalization, we talk about having advanced technology, the world has transformed into an interconnected society, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we as an academic institution, as educators, we need to change our thinking as well. So it requires education to have a goal of preparing students for the adult world. When you talk about learning styles, or when you talk about teaching pedagogies, when you talk about interaction, student engagement, motivation, academic performance, etc., the bottom line is, what is that we do for students in order to change that whole context? Can we as educators change that? Absolutely, yes. And that's why we say today teachers, the role of educator need to be that of a facilitator. Our aim therefore is not to be very hardcore, teacher centric, if I may use the word. It has to be student centric, because you need to allow students to take ownership of their learning. You have to give them the autonomy, you have to give them the empowerment. More so, you have to create a very conducive learning environment in the class where you are preparing students for the real world. You need to be enhancing students with a new set of skills. If we can design and change the curriculum, and I think, friend, when I've read quite extensively about the new NEP policy, and this is exactly what NEP also is trying to say: prepare students to face a real world challenge. So what is that we as an educator and academic institutions should do in order to do that? So which essentially means provide students with a completely new type of education. Students love it. We have tried, we have tested it, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you as an example. So maybe, I'm sure, you folks are already doing it, but I'll just show you as an example and how we have kind of improvised on that and made that as our teaching pedagogy. And we can see the change in us as educators, for the academic institution, and the students learning has also tremendously changed as well, because they find it absolutely interesting, the way in which we have kind of redesigned the curriculum. So when you talk about the fast pace of global change, it has actually forced academic institutions to take a completely different education perspective. And this is by providing the foundation and process skills for students to remain competitive. Gone are those days where we think that we need to be walking into a classroom, spending an hour, 2 hours, teaching them concepts, and then, our job is done. Those days are gone. Students don't need that anymore, because they have a lot of information available out there. Rather, we are saying, how do we as educators, you know, give them the autonomy and the empowerment so that they can take ownership? So how could educators change that context of teaching and learning from both a student and education perspective, which promotes higher education? Now, if you can see this, the diagram here, this is something which we came with a few years ago. So when I was heading the student enhancement cell, and particularly focusing on, the role that I had at that time was institution development. So we are saying, we are talking about a holistic development of a student. Holistic development of a student does not mean that we talk about the four walls where you just give them conceptual knowledge, give them the technical skills. All the students are good at it. The kind of challenge we felt, I've been in the industry for a good 17 odd years, and some challenges we have felt when we have students who come for internships or final placement is that they're very, very good in their technical skills, but what they clearly lack are those, transferable skills, the soft skills. So with that in mind, when we talk about the holistic development, that is exactly what we as educators need to do. We, as academic institutions, we need to do. Our focus should be provide them with formal education, including a lot of aspects to that, which essentially gives them the wings to fly, so to speak. So we talk about a cognitive aptitude, conceptual intelligence, creative and intuitive intelligence, practical intelligence. Now you may ask, how do we put it all together, in such a short span? Absolutely, it is doable. It is doable when we kind of come out of this, a kind of a teacher-centric approach. So when you have, let's say, an hour to teach or 2 hours to teach, in a week you would have, let's say, 4 hours or 5 hours to teach a particular subject, span across 12 or 13 weeks, and that into number of years. So you're talking about a student who is with us for a period of 3 to 4 years. So from that formal education till that end, when the student graduates, till the final placement, there is so much that you can actually do for that holistic development of the student. And believe you me when I say this, we have tried and tested this to see how it works, and now it is kind of, it's become second nature. The skills are kind of embedded. So let me tell you what we do here on campus. So while I think Dr. Vidya was rightly talking about student engagement, why do we have an issue with student engagement? So when you talk about student engagement, there are three, when you put that in a Venn diagram, so you're talking about 3 levels of engagement. You have students, the behavioral engagement, you're talking about the emotional engagement, you're also talking about the cognitive engagement. So if you need to bring all these 3 in place, and there is a synergy, and sometimes when students are behaviorally engaged, they might be emotionally disengaged. Sometimes when they are behavioral and emotionally engaged, they might be cognitively disengaged. So how do you therefore talk about a kind of a holistic, positive student engagement where you are involving student participation in purposeful learning? It's not what happens just inside the classroom, it's outside the timetable teaching as well. What is that we can do? And when you talk about student engagement also, there should be some sort of a desirable and emergent learning outcomes of university study. It's not where you're talking about, okay, I've got to teach certain concepts. Students come to a classroom just to learn something, and then they get their certificate. That kind of mindset has to change, to be honest. So engagement, therefore, is very straightforward. The more students practice a subject, the more they receive meaningful feedback on that practice, the more complex their level of understanding is, and understanding should be. And what they learn is what they actually take with them when they go to the real world. So when you talk about what we do, I think I have spoken this in multiple forums, and I think with the SIES batch as well, when I did a session on student engagement last time. So what we ideally do is our curriculum, the UK curriculum, it's not our curriculum. So when you talk about UK curriculum per se, even US for that matter. So we have, I'm sure in India also, that's how the trend is. But when you talk about redesigning the curriculum, we are focusing on embedding graduate attributes. Graduate attributes are the personal quality and skills which are embedded as part of each subject. We call that as module, we call it as unit. In India, we call it as subject. So for every particular subject, there are certain essential graduate attributes which are added on and embedded as part of the curriculum. So it's a given that when teachers are teaching that particular subject, these skills are also trained and taught. It sounds very easy when we say that, to embed the graduate attributes. So what we do here at Sterling is that, is somebody asking a question? Or are we good to continue?
No, please go ahead.
All right. Okay. So what we try to talk about is for Sterling. So every graduate, so we have come up with something called the graduate attributes, and it is mandatory that it is a part of the curriculum. And every graduate is unique in their own ways and will have their own experiences, their own approach and voice, but through their degree and the opportunities graduates, of the university will be. So we are essentially talking about four different graduate attributes. So we are saying subject specialist. Subject specialist is where we're saying it has in-depth knowledge, understanding, research, and other skill associated with their discipline. So essentially what we are trying to say is there are graduate attributes, and the importance of embedding them as part of the curriculum is so that we use different techniques, different mechanisms as part of our teaching, where we teach and train them, give them opportunities where they are able to apply them in a practical world, so that that kind of becomes second nature. So I'll show you an example of what we do it. So we have something called a the Sterling Graduate Attributes Matrix. And the matrix breaks down the elements of the graduate attributes so the students can understand how to start to build them during their time at the university. It is definitely not done exclusively. It is done inclusively as part of their curriculum. And for each of those attributes, there are examples of activities which might help develop these attributes as well. This is not a kind of a linear path, so to speak. It is a matrix which will be developed piece by piece by, during the time that's at Sterling. So when we say you're not doing it for one module, one semester. So we are talking about a student's journey over the period of 3 years or 4 years that they are with us. So for every module, there are certain essential graduate attributes. It is trained and taught, and they're given opportunities to implement that in a real context. So for example, this is how a matrix look like. So for instance, when you're talking about a graduate attribute called be a subject specialist, and the description of subject specialist is that they need to have in-depth knowledge, understanding, and skills associated with their discipline. What a beautiful way of giving a student a graduate attribute. So if you have, I'll show you an example of how we implemented this. And how students actually gained that particular knowledge and how they got an avenue to implement it in a real world scenario. So for instance, when you say the graduate attributes, which is be a specialist, subject specialist, ideally you're talking about 4 different things. You're talking about disciplinary knowledge, evidence-based, understanding, and application. So it's like from A to Z. So when you talk about disciplinary knowledge, it's about it's able to define the core skills and concepts associated with the discipline. So as educators, what kind of activities do we bring in to help students achieve that disciplinary knowledge? So it is definitely happening in the classroom. So they are teaching and learning activities, you have assessments, you have practical reading, and so on and so forth. Now, when students are taught something in terms of a particular discipline, it has to be evidence-based for sure. Evidence-based is allowing them to be able to identify key questions, research, and pursue rigorous evidence-based arguments. How do we train them that? You train them through various activities. So you definitely have, again, teaching and learning activities. You have assessments, practical, and reading. That's why when we say, when you embed essential graduate attributes as part of the curriculum is designed in such a way that the lesson plan will incorporate all the necessary active learning techniques. So if you have to teach students a particular skill, you embed them in as part of your lesson plan. And when you're teaching them, so for instance, let me give you an example. So for instance, when you're teaching a subject like MP, or managing people and organizations, it's taught in a period of 13 weeks, let's say. So you have in week 2, let's assume that you have a particular topic called groups and teams. So that is a concept. So as a teacher, as an educator, obviously you have to teach them concepts relating to groups and teams. So assume that you are teaching them the Tuckman model. Tuckman model is a concept. So in Tuckman model, there are different stages. Once you teach them the concept, our job is not done. There should be an applicability quotient when you're teaching them that. So for them to apply what they have learned so that it remains, that's what we call it as a, cognitive engagement. You are giving them some sort of a, activity to do. So what we do is we give them a marshmallow challenge. Marshmallow challenge is we allow them to work together as a team, and you give them spaghetti sticks. You give them one marshmallow and then you tell them to build the tallest tower. It's not an activity, it's not a fun activity where they are building it all together. We are saying implement the Tuckman model there, which means the first stage is the forming stage, then comes the norming, then comes the putting it all together, and then the actual performance and so on. During these 5 stages, the students themselves can feel a lot of friction, a lot of conflict, a lot of challenges, but at some time they kind of get to know each other. The mindsets, they kind of put things in the right perspective, and then there is a lot of synergy, cohesion, and then they are able to build that tallest tower. So essentially, you're saying you have learned something, those 5 different stages, and through this activity, you have actually implemented that, and then you have built this, you have performed an action. So likewise, when there are certain skills embedded, you need to be having the right activities, formative assessments, a lot of practical and reading, so that students are able, it kind of sticks. So that's essentially what we talk about, embedding those kind of learning activities as part of your curriculum and so on and so forth. So when you see this, the third part is understanding how the knowledge is constructed and contested. And then the final is application. So with this model in mind, we have come up with, last year in 2022, we said, let's try this out, where we bring students on a project and have them go through the whole cycle, and give them an opportunity on a real world project where they actually implement it. So we have developed this framework. We are saying the first step is the intensive guided training program, then the guided learning journey. The guided learning journey ideally happens with an industry. It's either with an industry or it's a complete research projects and so on. So students, with what they have learned in the classroom, gets that exposure with the industry people as guided learning, and then they are able to work on real world projects, and they go through a lot of team sessions and so on, and then their overall performance is measured. What a beautiful way of allowing students to take ownership. So in 22, we had an organization in Sri Lanka where we wanted our students, our data science students, to do a remote internship. So we started this internship project in May 22, for a period of 30 days, for a period of 1 month. It was a very, very rigorous learning process designed with internal workshops and practical sessions. So if you see on the right-hand side, it had this 5 different stages, as I showed you here. This is the framework that we developed. So the first one was intensive guided training program. Then it goes through an actual guided learning journey, then the real world project and the team sessions, and then the overall performance. However, when they went on for this internship project, what they had learned in the classroom, they're all data science students, but there were so many skills which the industry required, which the students did not have. So the students had to go through those rigorous learning process designed with internal workshops and practical sessions on those bullet point skills: data science with Python, data visualization, introduction to data analysis. So students were put through rigorous internal workshop training. Students had to go and learn these skills, through LinkedIn learning, through internal workshops that we had, get the certificate, do assessments, pass all those assessments so that they could actually go on to the real project. And once they did that, Then they went on to the real project. So if you can see here, the project had key milestones as well. So the details, the problem statement, the release date, the data analysis, the kind of tools. This is the actual real world project exposure that the students went through, with the industry people. It was absolutely rigorous. What the organization did was, now that the students had got a lot of conceptual knowledge, which they learned as part of academics, in addition to that, all those additional skills that they had gained through the internal workshops and so on and so forth, they put them on real world project exposure. So if you can see here, there were two groups. They gave them a case study and they told them to go and work on this particular case study, do a complete data analysis using those skills that they had acquired, and present their findings to the board members. Can you imagine a group of students? We had almost, like, I think 28 students who were on this project. But out of the 28 students, a lot of students got disqualified because obviously they were not up to the mark in terms of, acquiring those skills or able to present, and not passing the assessments and so on. And sometimes those are good checkpoints, because students would feel that anything that you do should be valued. If they don't have the skill, that's a kind of a indication that they need to improve upon. So we had two groups and two different projects for these groups. Real world project exposure they got with the industry people. And we believe in the concept of self-regulated learning. Again, like I said, all this happens when the mindset of an educator changes. So when you're talking about a high quality education, we believe in the concept of self-regulated learning. So students had to come up with their own plan, set specific measurable goals, conduct a business understanding, data understanding, do a proper exploratory data analysis. They could not have, believe you me, done this if they didn't have those additional skills. So the task was for them to brainstorm ways to solve the project goal. There was very little input or support at this point in time from the industry or from academics, because then the whole purpose is lost. We wanted students to take that ownership. So they themselves brainstormed to solve the project goal. They created a lot of things, as you can see here, a LaTeX report, the Power BI dashboard, and they finally created a very effective machine learning model. And that happened because students were given the ownership of their own learning. And one of the agenda for this particular project was the one-to-one project discussion session with students thrice a week. It was some sort of a 1 hour check. So that is all the time that the students would have with the industry professionals, where they say, when the industry professionals meet them, they say, this is what we have done. So they kind of brainstorm with them, throw a bounce of ideas, take a lot of inputs from the industry professionals. Believe you me, students absolutely loved that journey. So this is what ideally, and at the end of the day, when they presented their findings, with what started with a very clean, slate or a clean PowerPoint, turned out to be this, what you can see on the screen. The students themselves were amazed. It's not just that they worked through that 1.5 months of intense skill enhancements. They got exposure with real industry people. They got trained by them. They got internal workshop. They themselves took on a lot of skill enhancement trainings. And more so, they gained the confidence that this kind of project presentation to a whole load of board members. We had, I think, 12 or 13 people in the board members, and we are talking about the top level people, where they actually presented this project to them. Had it been a normal internships where they just go there, spend some few weeks and then get trained, and nobody knows what happens, how do you kind of measure the performance? Now, with this kind of an exposure, what has happened to the students, I'm sure you can begin to imagine what their level would be, so that the next time they go on a project, perhaps something bigger than this, what their level would be, because they have gained so much of industry exposure already. They have acquired a lot of skills. And that ideally is what we are trying to say. When you talk about providing them, if you see those levels from formal education to final placement, and ideally when we talk about on campus, so we have now made this as a mandatory thing. It's not something which we say keep it for the internship period. We are ideally talking about everything begins from day one up until the last day that they are with us. And obviously it kind of builds as students progress through every semester. During the summer break, when they have a longer period, they have a 3 months time, that's when they are kind of work ready. They are work ready with the kind of skills that they have gained. However, again, so when we have designed this WRP program, it goes through a rigorous process again. Students go through a proper skills audit. They need to enroll and register. They are taught how to do a proper CV, and they go through an initial screening. Student CVs are then sent across to good organizations. They get shortlisted. They are offered the internship or the final placement and so on. However, what happens whilst they are there in the internship program or the work readiness program is what you can see below. They definitely need to complete a statement of objective form. That has to be completed by the intern. So the interns, before they go for the internship, with the organization that is with us and with the organization that they are going to be interning with, there should be some sort of a consensus in terms of saying, why am I going for this internship? So what are your clear objectives? So they write their objectives. Then there is a site visit form, which is obviously, again, completed by the intern and by the company supervisor. Then you have the progress report form, and that's a kind of a reflection to be submitted by the intern, and the evaluation of the intern performance is completed by the company supervisor, and then the intern feedback form, and the final one is the progress report. What we ideally do is when there's a template which we give the students, it's around 1,000 to 1,500 words of their reflection of their work readiness program. What are the skills that you didn't have before you went? What kind of skills did you gain? How was your entire work experience? What have you learned new? And so on and so forth. So they write a real critical reflection, and that reflection we publish as blogs for students. And so this is ideally what we do when you talk about the work readiness program per se. Now, let me take a pause here. And again, I'd like to hear from some of you at least, is just for a curiosity so that we all learn from each other. If you can tell us, how do you engage your students in the classroom? So, and then we could continue this conversation. May I have few responses, please? Or if you have any inputs from what I have shared, that would be useful too. Anyone to begin?
Hi, Dr. Shanti.
Hello. Hi, Dr.
Hi,
Nitin.
this is Nitin Wazirani over here. I loved your model. I mean, I loved the entire concept of how you have built up the entire thing. So while in SIS College of Management Studies we have been doing it, but what right now I realize is, yeah, what I realized right now is a very structured approach that you are following, and you are trying to ensure that in all the steps, you are trying to inculcate the different skill sets which are important for a student. However, my question becomes very important. as a generation is changing, and while the students are changing, I also have
Mm-hmm.
find that the students have a different preferences of learning. Somebody would love to learn visuals, somebody learns
Absolutely.
through auditory, somebody
Mm-hmm.
learns through digital, and there are a lot of research which is talking about it. How
Mm-hmm.
do I bring about that in the institution? So while I do a psychometric test and I try to,
Mm-hmm.
figure out, where my students are, what the scores are, but still, batch by batch, it's finding it a little complex. So, would you like to explain me, as a teacher, as a professor, how do I build those areas?
Right. I absolutely love that, Dr. Nathan. So when you talk about the WAC model, the visual, auditory, and
Yeah,
kinesthetic, I'll talk about what I'll take my example, right? So that it becomes a lot more easier for me to speak from my own shoes. So I also have students, I teach at different level. I at the master level or possibly at the UG level. We do have students who are at different levels cognitively to begin with, let alone the learning styles. We also have students with different capabilities and competence and different learning styles, like you rightly said, the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So when ideally what I try to do is, when I have to teach a particular concept, I try to first see whether students have some sort of a prior knowledge on that, right? And again, I am totally against this idea of a very teacher-centric teaching style. I completely have moved away from that particular teaching style many, many years ago, and primarily because of the same reason, because it's very difficult to get the engagement of students,
right.
right? So when we talk about how do you inculcate or how do you incorporate different learners or different learning style onto your teaching or onto your curriculum? That's why we use different active learning techniques. So for
Got it.
instance, if I have to teach, if there are some students who are very vocal, or if they are very good in speaking, and when we are doing a particular group activity and so on, there might be certain students who are weak in that particular area. So you try to mix them together with that. So
Okay.
when ideally what we try to do is, we have to try and balance
Balance.
the different learning techniques. So
Correct.
in order to bring a synergy. Again, when you have visual learners, they like to see something, absolutely visual. So whether it could be a flow chart, it could be diagram, it could be using the boards. But there are some students who like only to hear,
True.
because they grasp. So we try to use kind of all of it and incorporate it as part of activities, so that there is a good engagement. As teachers, we know our student audience very well. So you know which student is kind of weak, or which student is very visual, or which student is very auditory, or which one is kinesthetic. So it would be good, therefore, if the students can be made in such a group, so that they are together. And I have seen this work very well. So when you are having formative tasks, when you are using different types of active learning activities or techniques, try to use a mix of everything, so that all the learners can actually grasp it. There might be certain activities which are very hands-on.
Uh-huh.
There might be certain things which are, like a Kahoot quiz. So for instance, and that would be easily, adapted by most of the students,
True.
but then you cannot use a Kahoot quiz every time, can you?
Right.
So that's what we're trying to say. So for teaching different topics and different concepts, try to mix match different learning activities given the kind of learners that you have in mind, and then put them together.
Okay.
So this, I
Okay.
have seen this work. I have
Okay.
actually seen this work. Yeah.
Amazing. I think I'll try that. And I also liked what I liked about it. There's a summers when the students do a project. There's a reflection that you do. What skills did you learn? Your work experience. What was something new? I think I wrote it down. It's something very nice because it's a reflection. And then if probably if the students would say that, I want to learn this, and probably then make a smart goal for myself, I think that would really be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so we kind of came up with this WRP and the model which I showed you in 22 last year summer. It kind of worked well. And one thing good is you train the learners today. I think one of the challenge I think doctor was talking about is that engagement. Sometimes it is easy. A life of an educator becomes easy when there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. Now, it was amazing to see how these group of students actually came back to us saying, can we actually now take on the role and can we kind of transfer the training back to our, peers? Sometimes students learn best from students, peer-to-peer
Absolutely.
learning,
Absolutely.
and that was amazing. So it's just like, so your role as an educator, give them what you need to give them and give them the ownership for learning, and they take on the responsibility and they carry that forward.
Absolutely.
That was something which came out beautifully well out
Correct.
of that again.
Correct.
Mr. Venkatesh, Dr. Venkatesh, I
Thank you.
think you have raised your hand.
Yeah, hi, very good evening. My name is Venkatesh. One question I had from the perspective of how do we engage the students. If you could just share some thought on how do we engage students when we want to start talking about new subjects and new technology subjects, like, when we introduce data science or typically subjects pertaining to technology for a non-technology students, because now data
Right.
science is one of the most happening areas and students are interested. So how do we build that engagement and how do we make them work around on that, because they come from a non-tech background? So any views, thought process, so that we could probably integrate that in our teaching process.
Right. One thing which I can possibly tell again, maybe it might be useful. Maybe you already have read about it. There is a model called BIGS 3P model, BIGGS 3P model. It is the presage, the process, and the product. That's why it is called the 3P model. The presage factor, there are so many things which comes under the presage factor. That is the student factors and the teaching context. So ideally, when you talk about students who are technically sound or students who are non-technical to a particular thing, it is absolutely imperative to test their prior knowledge. So again, this is something which we do a lot. I do a lot, in fact, also. So when I walk into a classroom for the first time, it is a given that there might be a lot of students who are, again, who are cognitively not completely engaged, rightly so, because they do not know or they do not have that kind of a prior knowledge in terms of that particular subject that you're giving.
So
How do
true.
you then how do you then allow, how do you expect them to be behaviorally or emotionally or cognitively engaged? And that is a fundamental mistake, I think, as educators we make. So it is absolutely important, irrespective of whether it is day 1 or week 12. The first time you walk into a classroom teaching a new concept, it is absolutely important to test the prior knowledge. You can gauge, what is the level of student. You can do a lot of things in order to test their prior knowledge. As a person, I don't know much about the kind of activities that you can actually do for data science, but there can be a lot of activities where you need to bring everybody on the same page. So you have to have some sort of activity to test their prior knowledge. So you know the kind of levels that the students are. And depending on the level, you then use different activities, simple activities. The best thing for me that has ever worked is being a storyteller. If I have to teach a very, very tough subject, believe you me, telling a story in a very, very simplistic manner and then putting in the concept, students grasp it like that. So, perhaps we can try that, Mr. Venkatesh. I don't know if that would make sense,
Yeah,
but
so normally I try and do that. Like I try and make a story about how do you look at numbers for your personal expense tracker? How do you manage to make a spend? How do you want to forecast when you want more pocket money the next month? So try and do something so that they think from a data point of view that how much of money they spend is important. So something like this I start. I was
yeah,
just trying to see whether this kind of thought process make them think about why numbers are important, so that they
right.
can start thinking from that perspective.
Right. Also, allow them to take, when you say allowing students to take ownership of their learning, give them some sort of a pre-reading. If students do not
Okay.
know about something, give them small tasks to saying, why don't you go and read this and let's discuss about this tomorrow. And when they come, you actually again build it into an activity so that students who have read, they are able to kind of get into the groove and so on and so forth. So there are multiple ways. It all depends on the topic, the discipline, and the activities, and the kind of mix match of active learning techniques that you bring on board. That's exactly how we are almost there. In terms of,
Thank you for that.
I'm
Thank you
very
so much.
You're welcome anytime. I'm very mindful of the time. I know we have just about 5 minutes, so we have just about a slide, and this is exactly what Dr. Nitin and you, Mr. Venkatesh, and I think the doctor who spoke at the onset of this session, talking about the kind of challenges that we as an educator face. Student engagement, absolutely. Student engagement is something we all as educators that we face. So if you see this table, so you have to the left hand side, you have what are the teacher and the student actions, which actually again move away from this thing of a teacher centric approach. It will not work anymore in today's highly complex globalized context that we are talking about. It has to be a synergy between a teacher and student. It has to be a very student centric approach. So if you want your students to be engaged, do the kind of things that you see on the left hand side. And if you are doing certain things which is one way, one directional, then that kind of leads you to very non-engagement. So I'll just kind of touch base on the left hand side. I'm sure you can see what is written on the left hand side. Sorry, on the I'll touch base on the left hand side, because teacher and student action likely to lead engagement is where, when teaching for active and collaborative learning, when students know what they need, some students, they walk into a class because they have that enthusiasm. Who builds that enthusiasm for them? It is us. And that enthusiasm can be built only when you have multiple ways of teaching things, allowing opportunities for teacher student interaction, because one directional, you have lost them for good. Building that rapport, building that trust relationship, very, very important. Giving them effective feedback, timely feedback, absolutely important. And creating academic challenge and high expectation. It has to always be that, because it cannot be what happens within that 1 hour. Give them certain challenges like what we kind of do, and respecting the diversity and encouraging mutual understanding. So from a student point of view, we are saying give them autonomy, make it self-regulated, allow them to take ownership, allow them to have that academic and emotional commitment to their studies. Again, if we do not do it for them, it's not going to happen, which is why we say give them avenues where they can practice, where they can participate in cooperative learning with peers and teachers, involving in shaping the learning process, responding to academic challenges, and so on and so forth. So ideally, when you're saying, ask the question to yourself, this is my last slide and I'm bang on time. So when you're saying, when do students have the opportunity to make decisions about how and what they learn? If you do not provide it for them, how do they learn? So as an educator, how we need to change the role of an educator in today's highly complex environment is to have a change mindset where you are saying, provide opportunities for students, for peer instruction so that they recognize themselves to be experts. What a beautiful way of looking at it. And provide choice in assessment topics and tasks to enable students to decide how they can demonstrate learning outcomes and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, I end my presentation. I'm again, like I said, Dr. Sen, it's a wide topic, and I'm very, very mindful of the time. So this is the best that I could do.
Professor Shanti, there's one question, and that's a very relevant question. We have one of the senior scientists with us, Dr. Gopal Patro, on his behalf. He has written in the chat that in a country like India, where the teacher to student ratio is very adverse, it's a very, very high. So we are talking about a 60 students, 70 students, 100 students. Undergraduate is 120 students sometimes. How does any model work actually?
In this part of the world also, Dr. Sen, for us in some universities, we have 400 students, 300 students, sometimes in classrooms. But ideally, when you talk about a real class size, by the actual norms, it should not go beyond 28, 30. That's the actual norm. But then again, we understand that, it cannot be the case in certain classrooms. You have a very large classroom size and so on. The best thing that we can do is break it out into smaller groups and teams, and then have what we have is we assign students to take on that role. So for instance, if you are steering the ship, you ideally create groups and then give them group project work. We have tried that. It has worked well. So if you have a class of 60, 70 students, the idea is for us to be a facilitator, teach the concept, and then assign groups and give groups. Groups would be possibly a group of, let's say, 8 or 9 students in a particular group with a leader. And again, as Dr. Nitin rightly said, mix the group. There should be a lot of group dynamics. So you would kind of have a mix match of students with learning, different level of competence, different learning styles, and so on and so forth, and put them on projects and let them steer the project. It works. I mean, I have seen it work. Maybe it can be tried there as well. So, you could put students on different projects, allow them to steer their own project and see how, we can try and see how that works. If that helps, Dr. Gopal.
That's fine. That's what we try to do even in India. The only problem is, different students at different levels. So sometimes it doesn't work out. And then
I know, I understand.
And somewhere what happens is that the students refuse to take the onus. So they feel the teachers are avoiding the onus. So they feel teachers are not doing the job what they're supposed to do.
But I think that's there everywhere. It's not just in India. It's in this part of the world as well. But we can only do as much as we can do. I understand.
Any other last question before we close? Any one question can take. Okay, there's no question. So, Professor Shanti, I think we take this opportunity. Thank you sincerely. Thank you very much for your wonderful session. We look forward to your support in future also. I think it was a great interaction. We learned a lot. Many of the things we do here, but I think we need to do better. We sometimes don't do the benchmarking. So this session idea was to do some sort of a benchmarking among some of our teachers, so that what you do and can we replicate. As Nitin rightly told that the experience sharing by the students after the internship is a magnificent idea. So where the students are recalling what he learned, what she learned, what she did not learn, what is required to be learned further. Those type of things I'm talking about. So we can improvise on many of the things what we do today from your lecture today. I think it was a great session. Thanks a lot, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think it was a lot of self-introspection session for a lot of us. A lot of self-introspection. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Nitin. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Sen, and everybody. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderful weekend. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.